Welcome to ISC2LA Beyond the Certificate podcast. I'm your host, Steve Weltman. This is your direct link to real cybersecurity career stories and insights from the ISC2 Los Angeles community. We'll explore the paths, challenges, and the wins, all to help you level up your own journey in cyber. Whether you're just starting out or looking to grow, this is where experience meets opportunities. Welcome to the podcast. Today we've got Scott Bly, another member of the ISC2 Los Angeles chapter. Hey, welcome, Scott. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm so glad to have you here. We've got a really good topic today. So our topic today is going to be off the wall. I love these topics. Zero to Security Hero, my non-traditional path to cybersecurity. Does that sound pretty good?
Sounds like I'm the poster child for it, as I'm sure we'll discuss.
I've heard you've got some really interesting stories. Like you didn't start out at all with the idea that cybersec would be a thing for you. Is that right?
Almost. I actually started out with that as the idea and then immediately abandoned that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's kind of like me with the robotics. I was like, oh, this sounds like a great idea. Here we are in the 1980s and electronics is not even a thing.
Exactly.
So, wrong time frame for what I had an idea for. But now robotics is all the rage, right? So you started off with theater and film and cinematography and all that stuff and things I don't know a lot about, right?
Yeah. So in high school, I was like the nerdy science honor club, AP calculus, all of that. And then I kind of got the acting bug and really kind of fell in love with it. I was good at it. I won awards and things like that. And I got into USC out here. I lived in Kansas City, got into USC actually for a program called the Resident Honors Program, where you do your senior year in high school and your freshman year in college at the same time. And because I had discovered the whole acting thing and that was working out for me socially and kind of getting me out of my nerd shell, I realized, okay, I don't think I want to go do that. I'm finally enjoying high school. I'm going to stick around and finish this out. So I turned USC down for that program, which was possibly a mistake, but it worked out anyway.
That's okay.
So then I ultimately ended up going to USC anyway, and by then I was accepted on a computer engineering scholarship. And I thought when I got there, well, my scholarship's at the university level, and they have this great theater school, and I really got the acting bug now, so I'm going to go do that. And so the week of orientation, I changed my major. And for the next, 6 months, was doing acting stuff pretty hardcore, learned about the film school, didn't even know about it at the time. And that's really the crown jewel, right? So I got into the film school, which is a very, very competitive program, like Ivy League level competition to get in and all that. So ultimately I got into that program, finished out school. And so I had a double major in theater and film. Ironically, never needed to take another math class, never needed to take another science class because I tested all out of all of that on the way in the door.
That's cool.
But the computer stuff was always near and dear to my heart, right?
Yeah.
You can take the nerd out of the whatever, right? So I ended up continuing to do technology stuff. And right out of school, I needed a job. Right. So I spent a year or so, just right at about a year at a talent agency and learned that I absolutely hated it. And then ended up going to work. My girlfriend at the time worked for a production company. Somebody she worked with, her boyfriend worked for a database company that did entertainment industry data. So I was like, oh, that's cool. I get to go do entertainment stuff and flex some of my nerd chops. That's great. So I went and did that for a while. And that ended up turning into a .com like merger angel investment situation. And it was a really big deal. It was like $100 million deal, the biggest angel investment in LA history at the time. And so I then ultimately was like, oh, I know what I want to do. I want to go work on the IT side. But this was right around the .com bomb. So not only were we swept up in all of that in the explosion, but also the implosion. So there was a hiring freeze and I couldn't get hired into the IT department officially. And then I got laid off, not once, but twice, because they hired me back onto my old team after I'd been promoted and this other stuff. So anyway, so I started learning the tech skills and got Microsoft certified so that I could go start doing it, and found myself unemployed after having been laid off twice in a row. And I went, all right, I'm just going to go it on my own. So I started getting customers and got Microsoft certified in Windows 2000 Pro and Server, and the networking stuff was a little harder. So I was working on that, but never finished the certification. Then next thing I know, 15 years has gone by with me running my business, having customers all over LA.
What was the name of your company in the past?
It was called IT Freeway.
Oh, cool.
So for the first
Okay.
few years, it was just, Scott Bly Consulting.
Yeah.
And then IT Freeway, we created as a partnership. I had a neighbor who did the same kind of work. And so we put together this company and ultimately ended up buying him out and running it as a single member LLC, but, hiring and firing and doing all the things that are much harder than learning the technology piece that we all need to do. And then 15 years in, I was sitting around having a couple of beers with some friends and complaining about, dealing with small and medium-sized business customers, and sometimes people decide they're going to screw you around on the bill, and they're like, dude, you've been doing this for a long time, you should maybe go get a full-time gig, I bet. And I'd always thought, I don't know, man, the guy with the theater degree going to get a job, because you have to call into support with Dell, or you have a HP rep come by, and I was always like, wow, those guys, whoa, they all have degrees in computers and or developers and all this other stuff. And I had not given myself the appropriate amount of self-respect, right? I had imposter syndrome, like, not for no good reason. My theater degree did not prepare me for a life in technology.
You
But
just brought up a great point, though. What you had was a lot of people experience that start off in cybersecurity, that start off with information security or information assurance. They're a soldier, they're a sailor, they're a Marine, they're somebody that just got out of school. There's somebody that worked in a McDonald's and then transitioned to a Starbucks and then studied their backside off to get the Security Plus in their first role ever. That somebody gave them a break. They have this imposter syndrome sitting on top of their shoulders, that 800-pound elephant sitting on them. How did you handle that?
so the first 2 years of me going, all right, I'm going to go do my own thing and just go take care of customers. I'd get the call and the customer would say, hey, we've got this problem. Can you come help? We got a Windows Server 2003 or whatever that's got this problem. Can you help? I don't know. I'll go find out if I can help. And the day never came when I couldn't help, right? Eventually there would be things that were hard enough that I would be like, this is a really hard thing. I'm going to have my guy that's really, really good at that particular thing come do it. And it wasn't just about me. But, those first 2 years, I never knew when the thing would come up where I just didn't know. But, Google has been around for quite a long time and has been our friend for most of our careers. And so, you figure it out, and the certifications are there to help, and you just learn what you need to learn on the fly and you get it done. You just go do the work. When it comes to like the imposter syndrome on the cybersecurity side of things, I'll get to that in just a minute, because that's real. I mean, that's real. So I went from, so I was talking to my friends. I said, hey, you could probably go get a full-time job. And I thought, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. And at about that time, the American Film Institute, it turns out, was looking for somebody to come in and take over their entire technology, everything, right? And so I happened to stumble across the recruiter, and we kind of hit it off, and it turned out that I was the best man for the job, right? Either you're getting people who don't have the technical chops, and they had a test because they didn't know how to vet whether or not somebody actually knows how to do the work. So they had literally a written test. It was like 150 questions or whatever it was across 3 different technical domains. And I came in and did the best on the test. Not in everything. Turns out my networking chops were not what I thought they were. But, Mac and Windows stuff, I came in and crushed the test. But I'm a test-taking kind of guy, which will lead to part of how I got over.
I was gonna ask all about your background in test taking, but we'll get there in a minute.
We'll get there in a minute, yeah, because that comes up in a future chapter. It turned out that I had the technical chops that I hadn't given myself credit for, and I beat out all these other people that did have their comp sci degree, that had worked at HP, that had done this, that had been directors of this, that, and the other. And so I was offered the job, and I said, yeah, I'd love to come and do this. So I was the director of IT for the American Film Institute. I was an artist. I have worn a lot of different artistic hats over the years. Filmmaking, music, I've published children's book novelist and stuff. So I've done a lot of different things. So I speak artist. And also, having been a consultant, I could come into an environment where they had to rip everything out and start over and hire the team. As an entrepreneur, I knew how to build from scratch. So I was kind of uniquely suited for that particular challenge. Did that for 3 years. And then I got laid off, right? Financial times change. I had given them a really great, high quality help desk style team to be able to keep the lights on and just run. And they were like, that's all we want to do now. So we're going to do that. So I suddenly found myself out of my ear with a 4-year-old at the time. I think that's a picture right behind me. Your priorities change. And all of a sudden I went, oh boy. All right. So my degree in theater does not accurately reflect my skill set. The American Film Institute is not necessarily going to jump off the page to recruiters at the Apples and Microsofts of the world and all that. I have an on-paper problem that I need to solve. And at that point, I had decided I was going to be pushing hard into cybersecurity, This was before the most recent set of layoffs and kind of the tightening of the industry based on pushed by AI, really. And so I realized I had an on-paper problem that I needed to solve. Right? I don't have a degree. My IT Freeway is not a company anybody's heard of, right? So my customers all knew me and knew what I could do, but that doesn't help getting through the AI resume review and the HR people and all that. So I realized, okay, so certifications are going to be how I solve this, because I hadn't done any more certs since that Microsoft Windows 2000 thing, like 15, 20 years before, right? I just would go learn what I needed to do. And mainly I was running the business and taking care of the technical stuff and running the teams.
Now, those of you that haven't taken a look at Scott's background on LinkedIn, I'd advise you to go do that. If you want to see what it's like to have every cert there is known to man, with a few rare exceptions. I think there's a couple from Oracle that you don't have, but outside of that, you've got pretty much everything that there's possible to get in cybersecurity. And I got to say, wow, it's a lot of tests to take.
It's a lot of tests. So it turns out I may have a bit of an addictive personality.
That's okay.
I realized I wanted to go do these certs, right? And I thought, okay, so I'm going to go get the CISSP. So the day that I got laid off, I ordered the book on Amazon. It shows up the next day. I crack it open, and it's 1,500 pages of small text. And I'm like, woo, okay, it's been a long time since I've needed to study for something like this. We came back to college or the SATs or something. And I went, all right, how do I do this? And I looked up online, and there was this guy who's written some books. And he said, here's what I find. Some students decide they're going to go do the CISSP. They study, they take the test, they fail. They take it again, they fail. And maybe they try a third time, and then they never go back, right? So he's like, here's what I find to be a path for success, which is a stair-step kind of approach. He said, I recommend you do the Network Plus from CompTIA, and then the Security Plus, and then you switch to ISC2 and do the SSCP, which is the Secure Systems Certified Practitioner, I think. And then you do the CISSP, because it's a monster, right? That's the one. When I took the CISSP and passed it, and the lady hands me the thing that says you passed, I almost broke down and cried right in front of a perfect stranger, right? It's an intense experience. Many of us have it. But how do you get there? So I was highly motivated, again, just laid off, 3 or 4 year old at home, need to provide.
That's a lot of pressure, by the way, just that alone. In case you don't know, for those that might be listening to this a couple of years from now, right now we're in an economic downturn where technology people that are knowledge workers are being laid off due to geopolitical, economic, climate things going on. And we're talking about a time in history, in your history, Scott, where that was before that even.
Yeah, that's right. And I had been through this back in the dot-com bomb, right? When I got that first Microsoft certification, I was going out and interviewing, but because of the dot-com bomb, which was very similar to the AI layoffs that we've seen over the last couple of years, there was this huge, the internet sites. Amazon can make a bunch of money. They were founded in 1995. By the year 2000, there was this thing called the network effect. So you had all these companies, kind of like exactly what's happening in AI, right? We don't have a business model. We don't have revenue, but we have a huge number of users. They called that the network effect. And because you had lots of users, that meant that you were much more valuable. So you had this kind of snake oil sales situation happening around early generation web apps. And ultimately, the dot-com bomb was when all the finance people finally said, you know what, you guys are full of it. This isn't real. And they just lacerated the entire equity capital, blah, blah, blah. I'm not a finance guy.
Yep, they did. They killed them off. And they got rid of all of there was massive amounts of companies buying each other up. And that happened to me too. So I'm going to ask you.
I was trying to get my first job in IT in that environment, right? Again, with a degree in theater and just a Microsoft certification. And it would come down to me and one other person. But I was like, the person I'm up against has 20 years of experience. I wouldn't hire me. I'd hire that guy. So that's when I decided I'm just going to go it on my own. And I started consulting and just finding customers and figuring out how to be lean and mean up front.
So your first certification was?
The first one was the Windows 2000 back in the day. The first one, after I realized my paper problem was the Network Plus from CompTIA.
Yep.
And Security Plus. I did exactly what the guy said. Network Plus, Security Plus, SSCP, then CISSP. And I knocked those out at a rate of 1 a week. So Network Plus in a week, Security Plus in a week. I was full-time.
Wow.
For those weeks, right? So
that's pretty amazing.
And then I did the CISSP in 3 weeks. Now, I had 20 years of IT experience. Most of this wasn't new information. Most of it was, how do I calculate this in my head? How do I, oh, really, that's how supernetting works. I didn't quite understand that because I was mainly in the SMB space or whatever, right? Oh, that's how vulnerability management works, right? These were concepts that I knew, but going through that that process, not only being at AFI and then interviewing to hire my team and realizing, oh my gosh, the people out there that I thought were amazing are not amazing. They're coming in and taking the test and bombing hard. Like, how did I do so much better on these tests of knowledge than people who've been doing this at the big companies? So it really was a nice level set for me that there's no difference between the folks who have a degree in this stuff or a master's degree in cybersecurity, the folks who are self-taught, who have the certifications and whatnot. I see zero difference in skill and capability based on those criteria. The thing that's a better indicator than anything else is passion, right? When you've got a passion for this stuff, when you're done with the day, when you're done with your work day, what do you then go do? That's what tells you what your passion is. And I hate to admit it, but you know what I go do? I go study for the next certification. I'll spend hours studying until I can't now because I'm a little more tired. I'm getting older, but I'll go find something on the Geekon.
But when you're focused on the thing that you're focused on, you're really laser focused on it, which is great. So I was going to ask you what resources would you say are probably the most effective thing if you were to look back at your younger self and say, the thing I'd recommend you to do is this, because you have a propensity to take in information that might be unlike some, better than a lot of others, not as good as some, but that propensity to intake information, digest it, and make sense of it and spit it back out on a test is one of your gifts. There's no question about it. Sure. And also having that real world experience aligned with not only your knowledge of the context of the questions you're being asked in those reviews, those tests, that helped a lot. So looking at the testing material or the certification exam prep guides that you had and all of the articles and all of the experiences that you've had and even some of the mentors you've had, what would you say is some of the best strategies or resources you found most effective in your past?
Know thyself.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Know how you learn. When it comes to the test taking side of things, you have to understand how you learn. And some people do and some people don't. Most people do know how they learn. I've really got to be hands-on and go do the thing in AWS on a console before I'm going to get it.
Yep.
My head doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You hand me a book right here. At some point, I'll have a CompTIA thing that needs to be renewed, and then I'll do the CASP plus because then you get all the other ones renew automatically, right? So that'll be, at some point, I have to do that.
That's cool.
I'll read that book. I'll take the practice test at the end, and depending on how I do, I'll figure out that there's some things I need to focus on or some things I forgot. And then I get an extra practice test from a third party. And if I'm passing the practice tests in the 80 to 90% range, I'll go take the real test, and then it's done. Now, for me personally, when I do that, I have a 100% pass rate with any of these tests. That's just how my head works. That's not how everybody's head works, right?
That's right.
You get stressed out when you go take the test, which is why the stair-step methodology is good, because you start with something low intensity. So we run at SIS, we run like a learning program, kind of like the education committee we have through ISC2. And I kind of coach folks that are our consultants. Perfect. We have a couple hundred consultants, and I coach them through like, how do you do your skills acquisition? What certs do you want to take? So we did as a group the AWS Certified AI Practitioner, I think is what it's called. So we did that one together, and some people just jumped in and really crushed it, and some people struggled a little bit to get through it because they've got a full-time job and are tired at the end of the day, and your brain is like mush because you've been coding all day or whatever. So you just need to understand what your parameters for your learning capacity are, right? And it's not about whether you're smart or not. It's about how do you learn? Some people learn best from video. Some people learn best from whatever. For me, personally, it's a book. That's the way I learn the best, because I can read as fast as I read, which isn't actually all that fast, but it's at my pace. Whereas with a video, I'm slowing it down. I'm speeding it up because it's, one concept I've got, and I'm like, come on, let's move it along. And another one is slower, and I wish I had more time for the labs, but I don't have time for the labs because I've got business to conduct, right? Yep. So for me, the thing to remember about the tests is also, you're not trying to become the expert in the thing. You're trying to pass the test. And that's one step along the way of becoming an expert in the thing. But there's two different concepts, right? So if you're trying to pass the test, just go pass the test. Identify the structure, the criteria that works best for you, and go do that. And then you have proven that you learned a thing, which is great. And then if the goal is to become an expert in the thing, then you are better equipped to go do that. But the thing that I like about the certifications is somebody that decided they know enough about the thing said, here are the most important things to know that proves you have a base of knowledge. Yes. And it lets you know that you haven't missed a bunch of gaps, right? Like, but when I skipped the A+, when I first started in IT, I skipped the CompTIA A+. And I went straight to Microsoft. And so for probably 10 years, anytime something would come up, I would be like, is there something that I don't know fundamentally about the underpinnings of the hardware? Because I didn't get any formal like hardware education. It was all
I
operating system,
see. I
right? So I was like,
see.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is this a bit flipping situation? Is this a solar ray came in and flipped a bit in a piece of memory? I don't fully grasp that. I didn't fully grasp registers until I recently went back because I did the A plus in 2021 or something. Finally, I was like, I skipped this. I may as well just go back and fill it in
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I've become a cert junkie, like a full on cert junkie. And so I went back and did the A plus, and it turned out there were a couple things I didn't grasp as well as I thought I did, which was the rings of trust at the OS kernel level, and
Right.
then registries with memory. And so I was like, oh, cool. Even doing the A plus after 20 some years in the game, I still had a couple things to learn. But I went and did it, and so I like taking the certs. I do enjoy it because you prove
I
that
can
you
tell.
know it. Yeah.
I can tell. Now I'm gonna ask a number. So is it above 40? Okay. Is it above 60?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I think I just crossed the 50 threshold. Now, some of that does
Wow.
include a couple
Yeah.
of like when I joined No Name Security, I didn't
Yeah.
really know APIs, and
Right.
so I needed to backfill that. And so like Broadcom has API Academy,
Yeah.
and they have 3 API certs that are, it's an hour and a half of videos, and you take the little quiz, and it's a certification.
Yep.
So there's a few that are like that. I would
Yeah.
almost consider the Microsoft fundamentals of Microsoft 365 or whatever. They're almost like that. Those are throwaways, but most of them aren't. Most of them are real, significant, serious.
Yeah, they are.
So
I mean, you've got things like I saw on their Amazon AWS fundamentals, which is really, really powerful. Having cloud security fundamentals. I come from my intro to, not really the intro to, the bulk of my understanding knowledge about the security community in Los Angeles comes from the CSA Los Angeles.
Oh, cool.
So
Yeah.
I was on the board.
I'm just getting connected with them. I actually had a call with Rick Blue from CSA.
Cool.
So I'm excited to finally close that gap.
So talk to Chris. He's a friend of mine. He was my former auditor for PCI a long time ago.
Okay.
Chris is a good guy. Callus, and he's got his own company, Arbor. I think I asked you about SAS. I just want to make sure that I didn't lose track of where we started off. Did I ask you about SAS, what they do, where they are?
You did, but I did it before we were recording. So
let's talk about what they do.
Yeah.
Because that's who you are today. And in your role, what you do there.
Yeah. So SIS is Systems Integration Solutions, 30-year-old company in technical staffing. They've done professional services in the past. Mostly what they've done for the last 30 years is provide highly qualified engineers and project managers and developers to very, very large tech companies and financial services firms and things like that. So that's the bulk of what SIS has done for a long time. Yeah. Professional services on and off during that 30-year period. And they brought me in a year and change ago to really launch a cybersecurity professional services arm.
That's
or
cool.
Line of business, I should say. And it was a really good fit because I'd been at No Name, API Security. Our sister organization is called ISOA Group, and they have a long history as an IBM partner and did a lot of API management work. And so API Security was a really good fit to add to the ISOA Group's suite of offerings. SIS brought me in to do that in conjunction with ISOA Group. And so we started to build out this API security practice. And we very quickly also pivoted to expand into cloud security. Because I was at AWS for 3 years after AFI and a couple of other positions. And so I ended up realizing, I thought coming into this, that cloud security was kind of saturated because being at AWS, everybody you talk to, and I ran the Enterprise Support Security Improvement Program for AWS. Mm-hmm. So I was constantly talking about cloud security with everyone from vendors to customers to other folks at AWS. So I was living and breathing AWS cloud security and vendor agnostic cloud security all the time. So my perception was a little skewed that the market was saturated. And it turned out that I was wrong. And so what we've really done is we've expanded quite rapidly into cloud security, remediation, a lot of assessment work, things like that. So cloud security, app security, API security is our greatest specialized capability. We have the concept of a strike team where we'll parachute developers with security chops into an organization where they've got vulnerabilities that need to be remediated, but the developers maybe don't know how to do it. Otherwise, the vulnerabilities wouldn't have existed in the first place, or they don't have time. They're pushed too hard to just get code to market so they can have features that the marketing team has promised to the market and blah, blah, blah. So we can parachute in a team to take care of those challenges on behalf of your developers, right?
So you are intimately familiar with the role called DevSecOps, which is the role that blends both the DevOps team plus the information security team that fits into developers' language in models.
Yes, but you used an interesting word right there. You said role DevSecOps. And I'm going to push back against that because that's unfortunately a problem that a lot of organizations have is they think of it as a role. It's the same problem that you see in DevOps. Oh, we'll throw it over to DevOps. And that's a department or that's a role or that's a person that they've just thrown DevOps on their title. And what that means to them usually is it's somebody who has some understanding of infrastructure as code or Terraform, and they have administrative rights to the AWS organization. That is not DevOps. That is a person with administrative rights to the AWS organization.
That's right.
DevOps
Elevated privilege user.
Yeah, DevOps is a cultural capability. It's how you deal with getting code to market. It's a whole series of processes, right? So actually just, I don't know, an hour or so ago, my course on DevSecOps was just published by AppySec University. So the email just went out. So that's live on AppySec University's website where I cover a lot of this. It's part one of a 3-part kind of mega course that'll ultimately probably have a full certification to it itself. So now I'm really in the cert game, right?
Yeah, you are.
DevSecOps is more than just, code scanning at your CI/CD pipeline. People forget. So that's DevSec, right? When they're thinking about DevSecOps, they forget about the ops piece, right? And according to the Department of Defense, the ops piece means you're taking all the findings, all the data that you're collecting from your AppSec side of the world and injecting it into your existing SIEM and your SOAR so that your security team that's handling the operational side of the world is also aware of what's happening on the dev side. So they have an understanding of the types of vulnerabilities that are flowing through. And a lot of organizations don't get those two pieces of it together. They think DevSecOps and they just think
DevOps. Right. They don't think about the security being a component of the feedback loop that's necessary for the changes in the production. So if you're not taking your developer almost by the hand and showing them our stack of vulnerabilities is specifically criticals and highs and feeding those back into their chain of development, back into where you're making some sort of an append going to your branch, then there's really no value in that DevSecOps, like you said, that capability. And to your point, that's a functional capability. I say role, but it really can be assigned to a person, but in most cases it's not. It's an environmental requirement for the team to be aware of those functional needs, and it's assigned to a person or a thing or a group or a service.
Exactly. It's a way of organizing your entire security program around the concept of having secure code that is delivered to end customers, right? And how do you update that and maintain that continuous cycle?
Let me back this up to real quick.
Sure.
So as a leader of the education program inside of your company, you have great knowledge of this and you've seen different learning styles. To the community that's at large, the IC2LA community and even the IC2 community at large, what advice would you give anybody considering a change into cybersecurity from where they're at today? We talked about the stair step and we talked about a few other ways to get in there, but it's so hard to just get your first role going. What would you recommend?
Well, before you even consider a role, think about why you're wanting to do this.
Good.
If you're wanting to get into cybersecurity because you think you're going to make a ton of money, think again. That's not going to happen right up front. There are entry-level help desk IT positions that pay less than an assistant manager at McDonald's these days. So if you're doing it for the money, reconsider that choice, right?
Yep. Agreed.
There's a very steep barrier to entry for this for a number of reasons. One is technical. You got to know what you're doing to be able to do this. And in order to do security, you kind of have to know how to do all the rest of it. So there's a really large knowledge set that you need to at least be conversational. I'm not a great engineer, but I am a great conversationalist, right? So I can at least talk about these things. And I know when it's the appropriate time to bring in the right engineer with the right skill set, right? To be able to solve whatever the problem is. So in order to get into cyber, you have to have a pretty broad skill set in the first place. So don't think, oh, I'm going to go get a job in cyber, because that ends up meaning you're going to end up getting a job that is over specific and you lack context. And that's a problem with like technologists in general in the first place, because you lack context for business. You lack context for working with people. You said, the people part is the hardest part. I don't remember if that was during the podcast or when we were just chatting before, but like for any technology challenge, you got people, process, and technology. We all default to, oh, what's the tool we're going to use? Hey, I know how to use this tool. I'm going to turn it on and make it work. And here's how you do the thing and the this and the that.
Not
Well, you're
important.
forgetting about the process, which is what
Yeah.
makes it work in the first place.
Yep.
The tool works within the context of a business process that's solving a business challenge, whether it's a compliance requirement or people are hacking us and using coupon codes in our API stream. So we're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a day because our coupons are being consumed wildly, or whatever the business challenge is, right? So there's process that wraps around the technology, but guess who's doing it all? People.
That's right.
And
That's
those people are not necessarily engineers, and they also are definitely not AI, and they definitely aren't bits and bytes and ones and zeros,
And they're complex, and they're really complex.
and have feelings and
Yes.
hangups
Yeah.
and paranoia and imposter syndrome, and are
Yes.
afraid they're going to get fired, or maybe they've got a drug problem that they're hiding, so they have weird behavior like that. That sucks, but it has nothing to do with
Yeah.
whether or not they're doing the job and how that impacts your ability to do your job. So I would say number one piece of advice is know why you're thinking about doing this. And if you're going to go do it, go into it with a lot of empathy, not only for yourself and the fact that you should probably have some imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
but understand that so does the guy you're talking to on your podcast also probably has imposter syndrome, right? I know I do.
Everybody does.
Everybody.
I mean, I walked into, Verizon Digital Media Services. Verizon's not a little company.
No.
As their compliance program manager, never having run an entire compliancy program, I know what imposter syndrome means.
Yeah.
But I turned that imposter name into something different, which is humble.
Yeah.
And I decided I was going to be a full-time learner and empowerer. The
Yes.
way I empowered people is, Scott, tell me more about you. What do you do? What do you love to do?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they're all interested in talking to me. Why?
Yeah.
Because I was genuinely interested in them. So my takeaway was information security, cybersecurity. Let's separate the two for a moment. I separate information security into the process side of this more so than I do into the technology side of this.
Yep.
Cybersecurity is more of the operational bits and bytes, speeds and feeds, technical technique things, which is desperately important. I'm not degrading it at all. But from an information perspective, information security is the business application of
Yes.
the use of risk management as a mindset that affects the entirety of the organization and the people involved with it.
That's right.
So I had to turn my information security program, the compliancy program, into a learning objective for me. Learn about the people, learn about the processes, and then learn about the technologies in that order.
Yeah. And
So what you just stated was so important.
You also set yourself really nicely for being able to be a dating coach, because
Okay.
listening, asking questions is the
Yeah.
number one thing you should do on a date, right? Like,
That's true.
learn about the person you're there with, and too many people end up talking about themselves.
That's true. And asking questions leads into another thing like podcasting or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or I'm just nosy, one or the other. But I honestly have two more questions for you. These are really important ones. What surprised you the most about the cybersecurity field when you made the switch? When you first started to make the switch, or after you'd made the switch for a year or so? What was your biggest surprise? Like, wow, I didn't know about that.
Biggest surprise.
Yeah, I know it's a
first thing-
tough one.
Yeah, the first thing that's coming to mind actually is ego. Egos. Like you said, humble, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't self-aware enough to make that leap, right? They don't have the empathy. That's why I said, the first thing to do when you go into this is enter it with empathy, not only for yourself, but also for those around you. You kind of address that with the concept of taking the imposter syndrome and converting it to humility and being a learner, right? Those are really, really, really fantastic concepts that are important, and it's about personal growth as well.
Yes.
But I find that, unfortunately, not a lot of people have that same mentality because they haven't made the leap. They're too busy trying to prove themselves and show that I'm the smartest, or they're just closed off, or their parents didn't love them, or I don't know what the problem is, but that ego comes through really powerfully and can be very hard to interact with. So that was one of the things that surprised me the most.
That's powerful.
When I was at AWS, there wasn't a ton of that, but there was some. And, when I was at No Name, that was a startup, right? That doing bleeding edge API security stuff. So there was a lot of like really large personalities and incredible technical capabilities. Don't get me wrong. Just because there's an ego there doesn't mean it's not backed by technical skill. But the ego is not necessary sometimes, right? And sometimes the pressure of a job can make it seem like there's ego. So some of this may be just my perception as well. But like, I, was surprised how much of that's out there. But at the same time, there are just as many people that have that humility and that constant learning and constant giving back. The community aspect, I think, really surprised me as well. But I've also sought that out. right?
Yeah.
So I've tried to get involved with the ISC2s and the different local organizations, the IISSAs.
I didn't even ask about that. We talked all about you, and we talked about the career path and trajectory. We talked about how to change from one career to another. But that was like the most important thing. You found that the community was not just important, but was it pivotal? Would you say that it was pivotal in your career into getting new ideas?
I would say that the work community, which is an extension of the cybersecurity community, I'd say was definitely pivotal in terms of getting new ideas. And by virtue of getting involved in the community and expanding the number of people you're talking to, the number of people you're networking with, that expands and is maybe indirectly pivotal because you're constantly talking to new folks. You're constantly hearing about new ideas and new ways of doing things. Going and learning, like the sessions that are at the ISC2 sessions or the ISSA sessions or wherever are amazing. Folks come in and they got 45 minutes to blow your mind. And most of the time, boy, they do.
That's right.
So I really appreciate that. And I like getting together with people and having that sense of community, right? In person. Virtual, we've learned to deal with it since the pandemic, but it's second fiddle at best, in my opinion, even though it does make it easy to consume content.
You brought a good point up, which is being in person. Really, I find I like being virtual for a while, but I crave being in person. And how do you find that impacts your ability to relate to others? Do you find that that's like a barrier?
When you have so let's put it in the work context first.
Yes,
so
that's what I mean, specifically with work.
Within the confines of your day job, right? Mm-hmm. So SIS has a physical office in Northern California. Most of our consultants are either in Northern California or are in Texas. And my business unit and our set of folks that we work with are all over the place. There's only 2 of us in LA. Everybody else is scattered to the 4 winds: Portland, Oregon, Maine, Florida, Ohio, right? All over the place. And so the thing that's important for us is to get together sometimes, right? Me and our VP of sales do a lot of in-person travel to be able to go to conferences and meet with customers and all of that, because we have the burden of growing the practice.
Yes.
So most of our interaction is still virtual, right? Zoom calls just like this. And I find that having the opportunity to get together with people physically is important to make sure that you're maintaining that people connection. Because otherwise it's like, oh, I'm going to go talk to my AI friend, Steve, right?
Yeah.
When I was at AWS, the first year that I was there, I didn't meet anybody physically on my team at all, ever. I would joke with my boss. I was like, there's no evidence, Brandon, that you're real. You may just be a really cool Amazon AI experiment. So that was our running gag, right?
Yeah.
And then I finally met him, and of course he was a real human being. But it's important to have some kind of physical connection, because otherwise we're a bit too removed.
I agree.
And then the community aspect of like an ISC2, I think it's even more important, because we don't have the constant connection in person, or we don't have the constant virtual connection that you have with your work colleagues, right? You spend more time with your work colleagues than you do with your family, sort of. And our virtual community of the ISC2 groups and things like that are even less connected. So the in-person is even more important, because that's where you have the chance to really meet somebody and get a feel for them. And then it's easy for us to have a conversation like this once we have met in person, right? So I think it requires a blend. But, the virtual piece is an important part of how we conduct business these days. It's just the reality of the transactional costs of physically getting from one place to another, even just here in LA, is huge, to say nothing of city to city communication, right? So
that's true. I know that we're coming up on the hour here, and I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I think we've got a lot more ground to cover. I love talking to you because you've got a lot to say, not only a lot to say, but a high volume of value. I mean,
I appreciate that.
Hard. Seriously, because we're talking about not just your history, but others' histories as well, and a good path to get into the cyber world. I can't wait to talk to you again, Scott. It's been so good talking with you today on this episode.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Steve. I appreciate it. Happy to do it anytime.
All right, I'll see you soon.
All right, thanks, bye.
That wraps up another insightful conversation here on ISC2 LA Beyond the Certificate. Remember, your cybersecurity journey is a continuously evolving effort, and the IC2 Los Angeles chapter is here to support you every step. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague and consider leaving us a review. For more practical insights and to connect with our vibrant community, please visit isc2la.org. Stay secure out there, and we'll see you next time.